Hello and welcome to today's video, in which I will be exploring how Palitoy's Action Force became Hasbro's Action Force. In the video I will cover a little bit of the history, how the change happened, what figures and playsets they used, and the story that introduced us to the new Action Force. I hope you enjoy the video, and as always, if you could please like and subscribe. It doesn't take a minute and you would help my videos to get out there. Thank you. In 1983, a UK-based toy manufacturer called Palitoy created a toy line called Action Force. Palitoy's Action Force was a multi-international counter-terrorist organisation consisting of 4 specialist teams. There was Z-Force, the military backbone of Action Force, and it was led by Captain Skip Campbell. Next was Q-Force, which dealt with naval operations, and they were led by Commander Leviathan McLaren. Next was SAS Force, who dealt with special operations, and they were led by Captain Eagle Buckingham. And finally Space Force, who dealt with satellite monitoring and maintenance, as well as outer atmosphere operations, and they were led by Commander Skyraider Connors. It was their mission to defend the world against the evil Baron Ironblood and his brainwashed fanatics known as the Red Shadows, and their plans for world domination. The toy line consisted of a mixture of military and science fiction inspired products, ranging from modern day military vehicles such as a motorised tank, all the way to futuristic spacecraft and genetically modified creatures. Action Force had it all. Palitoy were also able to incorporate some of Hasbro's recently released G.I. Joe products into the line. These would be repainted and repackaged as Action Force, and this was thanks to a licensing deal between the two companies. The toy line would also be accompanied by one of Britain's top action comics known as Battle, who would print Action Force stories in its weekly comic. The strip would prove so popular that the comic would change its name to Battle Action Force in the end. By the end of 1983, Action Force, with a combination of toys and comics, would see itself the number 2 best-selling toy in the UK, with over 10 million in sales. Palitoy's Action Force was a hit, but unfortunately there were dark clouds on the horizon. In 1984, Palitoy sadly were forced to make their toy design department redundant due to unforeseen developments overseas. So all future productions and designs were to be halted, and this unfortunately would have a dramatic effect on the 1985 range of Action Force products. With no new Palitoy design products ready for the 1985 range, it would fall to Hasbro to fill the gaps. Hasbro initially wanted to replace the entire line with only Hasbro products, so this would mean the Action Force teams Z-Force, Q-Force, SAS Force and Space Force, along with the Red Shadows, would now be removed from the line completely. However, there was a slight problem with that idea. Even with what had been going on behind the scenes with Palitoy, Action Force had become a huge hit in the UK and Europe, with over 20,000 Action Force Club members and comic book sales reaching over 500,000. So, as not to completely alienate its fan base by replacing the Action Force with only Americans, a decision was made to create a new storyline with a new Action Force and a new enemy, Cobra, and then somehow try to tie the two stories together. Simple, eh? This monumental task would fall to the writers of Battle Action Force, who came up with the story World Enemy No.1, which was the introduction to Action Force's new enemy, Cobra. I've previously covered this story in other videos, so if you want to know more about the story World Enemy No.1, I suggest you go check them out. In the story, we are introduced to an Action Force officer called Major Flag, who has been sent to Southeast Asia to monitor for any new terrorist activities. The Major soon finds evidence of the new terror organisation known as Cobra, but he is targeted by the Cobra saboteur known as Firefly, who leaves a booby trap that nearly kills the Major. While the Major recovers in hospital, he realises that this is only the beginning of Cobra's plans for world domination, and that Action Force must act quickly and accelerate its recruitment of new, highly trained specialists to counter this new threat. So here we are given a little tease of what's to come with the new Action Force. So, Action Force was now aware of the Baron's transformation and the new terrorist organisation known as Cobra. To counter this new threat, Action Force would have to reorganise itself, so a new overall head of Action Force is appointed, Major Flag, along with the new frontline leader, First Sergeant Duke. They would be backed up by a new team of highly trained specialists recruited from countries from all over the globe, as well as equipment and personnel which had been transferred over from the previous Action Force teams, such as Dolphin and the Sea Lion and Moondancer and the Triad Fighter. They would also have some new weaponry in the fight against Cobra, such as the Hovercraft, Sky Striker Jet and Flying Shark. But what about the Action Force teams, Z-Force, Q-Force, SES Force and Space Force, I hear you say? Well, it's said that the previous Action Force teams would continue to operate as a vital part of global security. The idea was that the focus of the story would now shift over to the new Action Force team as they battle against the new enemy, Cobra. And even though they were gone, the old Action Force teams would not be forgotten, as they would continue to make appearances in future issues of Battle Action Force, teaming up with the new Action Force to battle Cobra as well as other enemies. At this time, G.I. Joe was massive back in the States. It had its own comic from Marvel, and it had its own extremely popular Saturday morning cartoon series. And the speed Hasbro were releasing new products was insane, so space in the comic and the cartoon were at a premium. So to make room for all these new products, older products were now either used in the background or phased out completely. So when it came time to choose what products to use in this new Action Force, Hasbro went for a selection from their previous waves. As this Action Force was going to consist of specialists recruited from around the world, the characters chosen would have to have their bios adjusted to represent this. The characters' names would stay the same, but their birthplace and background would be adjusted. As an example of what they did, let's have a look at the three characters that we are first introduced to in Operation Snakebite. So, the first soldier we meet introduces himself as Flash, who we all know to be the Joe's laser trooper, and he was born in Lodi, California. His Action Force bio has him a member of the British Army's Green Jackets Regiment, which is renowned for its marksmanship and of course made famous by the fantastic TV series Sharp. Bastard. And his birthplace now is Birmingham, England. The next character to introduce himself is Ripcord, who was the Joe's Halo Jumper, and he was from Columbus, Ohio. His Action Force bio now has him as a member of the British Army's elite parachute regiment known as the Red Devils, and his place of birth is Manchester, England. And finally, the last character that we are introduced to is called Recondo, who we know as the Joe's Jungle Trooper from Wheaton, Wisconsin. His Action Force bio has him a member of Australia's Special Air Service or SES, and he was born in Melbourne, Australia. I just want to add to this by saying if we look at the three characters that we're introduced to, you'll notice that their roles are either versions of previous Action Man figures or versions from the previous Action Force. Whether this was done to help keep things familiar, I don't know, but I think it's a nice touch anyway. I personally remember this all happening, and I always thought it was the natural progression of things, and I was just stoked to be getting some cool new toys. So I think this speaks volumes of what an amazing job the writers at Battle Action Force did to try to tie the two stories together. Right, with the story in place, let's have a look at what we've been waiting for, the toys. In this next section, I've included the character's new Action Force profile alongside the action figure, as this will allow you to see what changes they've done to each character. As I mentioned earlier, all the new Hasbro products will be made up of products from their previous waves. So, from their very first wave back in 1982, we have one of the characters from Operation Snakebite, Flash, the Joe's laser trooper, who we already know was from Birmingham, England. And as you can see with his new profile, we get his name, birthplace and a couple of paragraphs of information. Next up we have Breaker, who is Action Force's communications expert, who is now from Munich, Germany. Next we have a couple of characters that had made a PC OS, a permanent change of station, and made the move to Action Force. So first up we have Dolphin and the Sea Lion, who were previously in Q-Force before moving over. The original Palitoy figures that were supplied with the Sea Lion and Tri-Fighter would be replaced by repaints of the previous Joes. For a gold star, can any of you out there tell me which figures they used? Please leave your comments below to let me know. Next up is Moondancer and his bizarre Triad Fighter. Again, he was previously a member of Space Force before transferring over. Both of these character profiles would stay the same as their previous ones. Up next is an interesting one, as it's the Action Force Wolverine driver, Tunup. Previously, the driver of the Wolverine was Hunter, who was a member of SAS Force, and was represented by a repaint of the Cobra officer. But as keen fans of G.I. Joe will spot that this character is actually Rock and Roll from the Joes. Now, if my memory serves me right, the Joe's Wolverine driver was CoverGirl. So, why did they not use her? I don't know, as I think she would have made a good Action Force figure. Anyway, Tunup's Action Force profile will have him from Malmö, Switzerland. Next up, we have a couple of figures that we used in the previous Action Force. First up, we have Stalker, who is Action Force's Specialist Infantryman, who was born in Marseille, France. Stalker was previously known as Jammer, and was Z-Force's Communications Specialist, and he came supplied with the Z-Force Command Centre. Next we have Scarlet, who was Action Force's Specialist Weapons and Counterintelligence Expert, and she was born in Bruges, Belgium. Scarlet was previously known as Quarrel, who was Z-Force's Commando and Undercover Specialist, and she came supplied with the Z-Force Rapid Fire motorcycle. Up next we have a selection from Hasbro's 1983 range. First up we have Torpedo, who is Action Force's Underwater Expert and SEAL. He was born in Rotterdam, Holland. Next is Snowjob, who was Action Force's Arctic Specialist from Perth, Scotland. I loved this figure. It was my holy grail at the time. The only trouble being that it was extremely hard to find. I remember seeing him in my local toy store, and when I went back to get him the next weekend, he had gone. Next is Action Force's second in command and new frontline leader, Duke, from Boston, Massachusetts. He's one of the few Americans to make it into Action Force, and we were first introduced to him in the story Operation Snakebite. Next we have Doc, who is Action Force's medic, who was from Kingston, Jamaica. Up next is Action Force's Helicopter Assault Trooper, Airborne, who was from Naples, Italy. As with the previous wave, there have been a selection of figures that have been used in the previous Action Force. First up we have Gung Ho, who is Action Force's Jungle Warfare Specialist, and he is from Florida in the United States. Gung Ho was previously known as Gaucho, and he was the Z-Force mechanic, and he came supplied with the Z-Force Command Centre. Next is Tripwire, who was Action Force's Bomb Disposal Expert, who was from Swansea, Wales. I like the idea that they kept his clumsy, just like his G.I. Joe counterpart. And finally, from the 83 wave, the first new vehicle, the amazing Sky Striker and its pilot Ace, who was from Boston in the United States. And again, this is another one of those sets I could just never find. Okay, now for the final wave from 1984. First up, another character for Operation Snakebite, Ripcord, and he was Action Force's Halo Jumper from Manchester, England. Next, we have Action Force's Flamethrower Specialist called Blowtorch, who was from Toulouse, France. I always had a soft spot for Blowtorch. I think it was the colour scheme. Up next is Mutt and Junkyard, Action Force's Canine Handler and Dog, and they were from Madrid, Spain. Next is Action Force's Heavy Machine Gun Specialist, Roadblock, who is from the French Congo. And the next character, who was the final character we introduced to in Operation Snakebite, Recondo, who is Action Force's Recon Surveillance Specialist from Melbourne, Australia. Now, an interesting fact here is that Hasbro released Recondo. He came as a standard blistered character, whereas Action Force character came supplied with the Silent Attack Kayak, which was previously supplied with Beaver, who was a member of SAS Force. This was a great bit of kit. I loved the canoe. I even had wheels on the bottom so you could push it along. Okay, let's finish off with the vehicles. First up we have Deep Six, who was Action Force's Flying Submarine Pilot from Cork Island, and he came supplied with the Flying Shark. And finally we have the fan favourite, the Hovercraft, with its pilot Cutter, who was from Auckland, New Zealand. This new lineup would also consist of products from the previous Action Force teams such as the Whirlwind Cannon, the Command Centre and the Pack Rats. And that would complete the lineup for the 1985 release of Action Force. Okay, finally, let's have a look at the story that would introduce us to the new Action Force, Operation Snakebite. This is an abridged version of the story as it would take so long to read the whole thing. As the story goes, I liked it. It was a good introduction to the new Action Force and the new products. It's a shame what happened with Palitoy in the previous Action Force. Maybe one day someone will do them justice and do a faithful version of the Red Shadows. Anyway, on with the show. Operation Snakebite. In part 1, we join 3 professional soldiers as they travel to one of Action Force's new training schools, Action School 6, which was located in the swamps of the Deep South in the United States. Each of the men had been given a call sign. There was Flash, a soldier in the British Army's Green Jackets Regiment, renowned for its marksmanship. Next was Ripcord, a soldier in the British Army's Elite Parachute Regiment known as the Red Devils. And finally Recondo, who was a member of Australia's Elite SAS Regiment. When the men arrive at the school, they are greeted by their new First Sergeant Duke and the new Commander of Action Force, Major Flag. Once the men had settled in, Duke gives them a tour of the school, showing them the new equipment that they will be training with, such as jump packs and laser rifles, before taking them out on patrol. While out on patrol, the men are unaware they are secretly being filmed by a Cobra claw equipped with a high-speed camera. Thousands of miles away, the terrorist leader known as Cobra Commander receives the information sent by his agent. With the location of the school, he could start Operation Snakebite and turn Action School 6 into a slaughter pen. In Part 2, Cobra Commander starts the next phase of Operation Snakebite by sending in his agent at ground level. Back at the school, Duke continues to train the men on the new equipment, with Flash taking a particular liking to the laser rifle. Ripcord and Recondo leave Flash to play with his new toy, and they sneak off for a bit of fishing. But the only thing they catch is one of the school's secret underwater mines that was part of the school's defences. Elsewhere, the mysterious Cobra agent had managed to acquire top secret information for the school's defences and relays it back to Cobra Commander. With the information received, Cobra Commander could now make safe passage for his forces who were secretly moving into position, ready for the slaughter. In Part 3, we join Flash, Ripcord and Recondo as they pull evening sentry duty. The men nearly discover the Cobra agent known as Zartan, but after evading the men, Zartan dismantles his swamp scare and makes another report to Cobra Commander. In the morning, Duke gets the men to practice putting up and dismantling the Action Force Mobile Command Centre before dismissing the men. The men were starting to miss their old units and were not overly impressed with this new Action Force, so decide to take a stroll to take their minds off it. On the walk, they come across Zartan's dismantled swamp skier and mistake it for a box of junk and kick it into the swamp. Nearby, a seething Zartan watches on and waits to collect his swamp skier from the dirty swamp water, vowing that he will have his revenge on the 3 men. Thousands of miles away, Cobra Commander continues his plans for Operation Snakebite, moving his forces into place. And later that day, Duke prepares the men for some SEAL training as they head out on boats into the swamp, unaware that they are being stalked. In Part 4, Duke takes the men into the swamps to practice SEAL diving techniques, unaware that they are being hunted by the mysterious Cobra agent Zartan. Recondo dies first, with another recruit called Kraus following after. But as Kraus starts to descend, he is attacked by Zartan. Recondo loses sight of Kraus, but soon spots a shape following him through the murky water. Believing it to be Kraus, he carries on, oblivious to the danger behind him. Recondo spots a boat circling above and swims up to investigate, and when he surfaces, he is chewed out by Duke for not keeping an eye on his dive buddy who they just found floating on the surface. Kraus is rushed back to the school's infirmary where he is pronounced dead, as his lungs had been crushed somehow. A group of nearby corporals overhear the news and immediately blame Recondo for the accident and the run of bad luck that had plagued the school since his arrival. They were completely aware that it was the work of the Cobra agent Zartan. A fight soon breaks out between the corporals and Recondo, with Flash and Ripcord joining in to help their friend. Major Flag and Duke see the fight and break it up, dressing the men down for acting like yobs in an alleyway. The men tell the Major to save his breath, as they have had enough of Action Force and want to be returned to their old units. Later, the Cobra agent Zartan signals the waterborne assault to start to move in when he hears the hum of an Action Force hovercraft. Taking cover, he waits for it to pass, and as it gets closer he can make out the voices of the 3 men he had chosen as his own personal victims. And as the hovercraft passes, he secretly sneaks aboard and plants a booby trap in the men's stowed gear before vanishing into the swamp's water unseen. Later, Ripcord and Flash and Recondo are on a plane heading back to their old units when Zartan's booby trap is discovered just in time. The men then decide that the school could be compromised and order the plane to head back to the school. Back at the school, Duke prepares for his evening patrol round the sentries with a heavy heart, as he's sorry the men had left, as he thought they could have gone far in Action Force. At the same time, Cobra forces surround the school, ready for Operation Snakebite. In Part 5, we join Duke as he makes his evening rounds, unaware that the school was being surrounded by Cobra terrorists. High above the school, Flash, Ripcord and Recondo prepare to parachute down to the school and warn the possibility of an impending attack. Duke finishes his rounds and makes his way back to the command point to meet up with Major Flag. Ripcord, Flash and Recondo manage to make it down to the school, but find it crawling with blue-clad soldiers and act quickly to secure some weapons. Flash manages to grab a laser rifle from the school shooting range and starts to take out the blue-clad soldiers. Major Flag and Duke hear the commotion outside and move out to see what's going on, and can't believe their eyes as they see 3 men fighting off multiple blue-clad soldiers. Major Flag recognises them as Cobra troopers, as he and Duke head over to help them out just as the Cobra attack begins. In Part 6, Cobra begins Operation Snakebite. It's planned to turn Action School 6 into a slaughter pen. Major Flag and Duke had managed to link up with Flash, Recondo and Ripcord, who had accidentally stumbled across the Operation Snakebite and were now buying time for their comrades. Cobra troopers pour into the camp and start throwing incendiary grenades into the camp's wooden huts where the men were sleeping. Seeing the danger, Duke gets the men to start shooting the branches that were overhanging the school's huts. The branches were covered in overhanging moss, which fell on the fire, creating a smokescreen, allowing the men to escape from the huts. Using the smokescreen as cover, Major Flag orders the men to start to construct a mobile command centre which was stowed in some nearby boxes. Duke orders Flash and the MG team to provide cover for them as they get it built. A wave of Cobra troopers suddenly pour through wearing respirators, but they are met by Flash and the MG team, who provide heavy suppressing fire and push them back. Broken, the Cobra troopers fall back and encounter Zartan. They report that they can't get past the fire from the MG and laser trooper. Without saying a word, Zartan disappears into the swamp's murky water. Meanwhile, back in the school, Duke and the men had completed building the command centre, and the order to fall back is given. Hearing this, Flash turns to the MG team to tell them to fall back, but the MG team are nowhere to be seen. All he can see is a broken MG and the evidence that someone had been dragged into the swamp. As he gets closer to inspect, Zartan suddenly leaps out of the swamp and grabs Flash. Back at the command centre, Recondo and Ripcord can hear their friend is in trouble and rush to go and help him. But Duke orders the men to stay put as it's suicide out there. In the final part of Operation Snakebite, we join Flash as he's being dragged down into the swamp's water by the Cobra agent Zartan. Desperate to save their friend, Ripcord and Recondo want to go out and save him, but Duke has ordered the men to stay put. He tells them that it's his responsibility to save Flash and starts swinging out to his position using the tree's vines. Once over Flash's position, Duke dives in just as Zartan is dragging Flash deeper into the swamp. Spotting Duke, Zartan releases Flash and swims over to attack. A fight ensues with Zartan slowly getting the upper hand. It looks like the end for Duke until 2 alligators turn up and start to attack Zartan. Seeing his chance to escape, Duke quickly swims back up to the surface to find Flash is still alive. But he doesn't have long to celebrate as a flotilla of water moccasins arrive, carrying the 3rd wave of the Cobra assault, intent on running him down. But as soon as they appear, they start to vanish in balls of flame, as a flotilla of Action Force hovercrafts arrive just in time. With the attack eventually repelled, the men regroup at the school and spot 2 alligators floating in the swamp. Major Flag congratulates the men for their actions and says they will be an asset to Action Force. While the men celebrate, a cobra claw flies silently overhead, filming the men below while blending in with the nearby flock of storks. Later, the video is viewed by Cobra Commander, who reflects on the success of Operation Snakebite. Although only a partial success, Cobra had managed to draw first blood, and they now had information on the new members of Action Force, and each of them would now have a price on their head for the next time they meet. And that was our introduction to the new Action Force. Well done, it looks like you've made it to the end of today's video, so thank you. As always, I look forward to hearing your comments about today's video, and I think that's enough from me now, so thank you for watching. And until next time, stay safe and yo Joe!